this crowd, hundreds of people died. The first tragedy during his reign. Later, there was this unfortunate for Russia war with Japan, which was followed by the first Russian Revolution. And then there was another war, the First World War, which led to his abdication of throne, and soon afterwards he was arrested with his family and he was executed without any trial in 1918. Later he was canonized as a saint with his family by Russian Orthodox Church abroad, and just recently by Russian Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchate. Now we are watching the shots demonstrating the year before the First World War began. And again, according to this myth, it is presented in a way that this war was arranged by governments and all simple people who were against this war. That's why it brings the shots of rich people who are happy, and later it will demonstrate ordinary people who were toiling and who were definitely unhappy. And the actual attitude to this war by Bolsheviks was quite opposite to the rest of intelligentsia. Because, first of all, it should be mentioned that when Lenin knew about the beginning of this war, he was so happy. It was probably one of the happiest days in his life, because he knew that in this case, in the turmoil of the war, Bolsheviks would be able to become extremely influential and probably would seize the power. Second, and following this attitude, Lenin and some group of internationalists invented the slogan for the defeat of Russia in this war. So they were the only people who wished Russia was defeated. And this was so arrogant or so unacceptable for other people that this wasn't supported by anyone, and only the very small group actually was sharing his view. Until the war started, no one knows that it would start. And though Lenin was following all the events and he was trying to understand what's going on, he still was absolutely unaware of the future war, as well as many other politicians. He wrote in one of his private letters in 1913 that the war between Russia and Austria would be a very useful thing for the revolution throughout Eastern Europe. But it is hardly possible that Franz Joseph and Nicky, he named Nicholas II like this, that Franz Joseph and Nicky would give us this pleasure. It is known that there were many different reasons for the First World War. Actually, the events go back to war between France and Russia in 1870, which was followed by the foundation of the Second Reich. The United Germany suddenly appeared in Central Europe and dominated this, especially when Germany established their alliance with the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Central Europe was definitely dominated by these two great empires. And according to the simple laws of geopolitics, France didn't have any other chance but to be in union or to make a treaty with Russia. And so there was this allies, later joined by England, formed what was called Entente. We have to take into account also the long-lasting Russian interest in Balkan affairs, because in Russian understanding, Russia's historical mission was the emancipation of the Christian people of the Balkan Peninsula from Turkish yoke. And this was done at the beginning of the 20th century, but even afterwards Russia was extremely sensitive to the interests of the Slavic countries of the Balkan Peninsula. And this was violated by Austria when it annexed Bosnia and Herzegovina in 1908. And from that time, Russia was extremely cautious about all these Balkan affairs. When we are going to the question about who was responsible, it is definitely very difficult to indicate one responsible for such an affair as this war, which gradually involved up to 28 nations. From German point of view, the burden of responsibility was on Russia, because when Russia declared the general mobilization, it didn't leave any room for Germany but to declare the war. At the same time, Germany blamed England for not preventing this, because the German emperor thought that England had the power to stop Russia from this general mobilization. With the Treaty of Versailles at the end of World War I, it was stated that Germany is predominantly responsible for the beginning of this war. And so at the same time, we can have different views on the causes, because from Lenin's point of view, for instance, the main reason for this war was the development of imperialism, which he regarded as the highest stage of capitalism. And he thought that at this stage of capitalism, the war is just inevitable, and it doesn't matter what actually causes this event. There were obviously different reasons for the beginning of this war, but we have to take into account that Russia was not completely prepared for this war, and it didn't wish to begin. The fact was that though Russia was developing fast, still it wasn't in the situation to begin the big war. The actual figures were that the Russian industry had a positive balance of trade, and the annual production increased in 3 last decades before the First World War enormously. With coal production it was 10 times, with oil 4 times, and grain about twice. The industrial output increased by 63% from the turn of the century up to 1913. And the population in 3 decades increased by more than 50 million people. But still Russia was behind the most advanced countries of the world. Russia remained behind 4 countries, which were Great Britain, Germany, United States and France. And the level of life in Russia